The title of my sermon is The Purpose of Suffering. So obviously everyone in a body has pain, physical and emotional, happens all the time. And so of course we all ask, why? If we're beloved of God, why would God allow us to suffer? Okay, so the image you're seeing is from NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. And I went online and edited down some things that I found from their website, the Webb website. So this telescope has delivered the deepest and sharpest infrared image of the distant universe so far. This image shows galaxy cluster SMACS 0723. It is teeming with thousands of galaxies, including the smallest, faintest objects ever observed. Webb's near-infrared camera has brought distant galaxies into sharp focus. They have tiny, faint structures that have never been seen before, including star clusters and diffuse features. This deep field image taken by Webb's near-infrared camera is a composite made of images at different wavelengths, totaling 12.5 hours of exposure. This image shows galaxy cluster SMACS 0723 as it appeared 4.6 billion years ago, with many more galaxies in front of and behind the cluster. The data reveals light from one galaxy that has traveled for 13.1 billion years before Webb's mirrors captured it. The light took so long to reach us that we are looking back in time. When we are viewing the youngest, most distant galaxies in this field, we are looking back in time to within 1 billion years after the Big Bang. These distant galaxies are seen from the time the universe was less than 1 billion years old. This image is approximately the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length, a tiny sliver of the vast universe. SMACS 0723 can be viewed near the constellation of Volans in the sky seen from the Earth's southern hemisphere. So that's what NASA has to say about this image. So I want you to think about this for a moment. Astronomers have never before observed any object that is, quote, only less than 1 billion years old. So young. They have determined that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. That is, the Big Bang occurred 13.7 billion years ago. So the Earth herself is 4.5 billion years old, which, considering she is 1/3 the age of the universe, is pretty old. The ancestors of human beings as a species emerged on Earth about 5 to 7 million years ago, or 1/750th of the age of the Earth, or 1/2283rd of the age of the universe. Our modern form of humans only emerged about 200,000 years ago. The Earth has been in existence 22,500 times as long as humanity has been in existence, and the universe has been in existence 685,000 times as long. So those are the numbers about time. Now think about the numbers about space. That image is the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. I really have no idea how many grains of sand held at arm's length it would take to cover the area of the sky. Think about that for a minute. Each one of those tiny areas would contain its own set of thousands of galaxies. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share and get back to my picture here. So when confronted with these numbers, people usually say, oh my goodness, I'm so insignificant. In fact, the opposite is true. Mystical knowledge tells us that the universe is an expression of consciousness, which emerges from love, which is the only reality. We are the same as the universe, an expression of consciousness which emerges from love, which is the only reality. When in moments of frustration, I ask, God, why does it take so long to resolve our fears and move into full awareness of our unity with you? I have been told, you have no conceptual understanding of how long your consciousness has been in existence, and thus how far you have come to attain being human and attain the level of awareness that you do have. Aha. When seen from this perspective, that it has taken me 13.7 billion years to be at the level of awareness I now have, then I can believe what I have been told. You are almost home. I have been told that when the consciousness of the child of God decided, I can do this myself, the intensity of the fear of being lost and alone forever was so great and so traumatizing that there is no way we can go back there and heal it. It would overwhelm us and re-traumatize us. The power of that fear was so intense, it produced a bang so ferocious that the density of matter emerged as a way the child of God could interact with its belief in being alone and thus learn how to come home. It is important to remind ourselves that this process of believing in separation and returning home to full awareness of unity is not bad. It is necessary for that full awareness part. Yes, we used to be home, but we lacked awareness of that. So all of our travels through experience is what allows us to develop the longing to return home and to be in full conscious relationship with God, our source. All of our experience is necessary. As a therapist, I know that some childhood experiences are so traumatic that a person has to be engaged in therapy for years to be strong enough to even be willing to try to look at it and heal it. As a therapist, I have been told about terrible, terrible, terrible things. All we have to do is read certain news items to be aware of the horrors humans can visit on each other. Some experiences are so awful that they cannot be fully healed in one lifetime. And simply attaining a feeling that some people can be trusted is wonderful progress. Now imagine the pure terror of experiencing the belief of being lost forever from our blissful primordial state of unconscious oneness with God. Has anyone here raised children? Yes. It is called the terrible twos because that is when in our development we begin to realize we have a separate identity from our loving parents, and it is terrifying. All sorts of very intense feelings and behavior result. It takes quite a process for a child to adjust to being its own person and yet still in relationship with its loving parents. Once the child realizes it can be itself and still be loved, things calm down. If there are disruptions in this developmental process, then the child is left with some fundamental insecurities. Why would this happen? Why would not each child be totally loved and their needs totally understood? The short answer is because parents are humans and have their own needs and quirks and flaws. The longer answer is what I said a minute ago, that all our experience is necessary to help us heal from that original belief in separation. But I also just said the intensity of the fear of being lost and alone forever was so great and so traumatizing that there's no way we could go back there and heal it. So how do we ever get home? It was shown to me that this is what Jesus, who I call by his Aramaic name Yeshua, was doing during his time between the crucifixion on Friday and the resurrection on Sunday morning. If anyone has attended church services where the Apostles' Creed is recited, you will have heard the phrase, he descended into hell. On the third day, he rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. What this means is that he went back to the original separation trauma and healed it. We never have to go back there. He cleared the way home. All we have to do is undo every fear-based belief that we are still attached to, so our original loving nature can be revealed there all along, who we have always been, without knowing it. When this was shown to me, I became quite tearful and was overwhelmed with gratitude for Yeshua's courage, his determination, and his immense love. By going back to this original trauma and resolving it, he shortened the amount of time required for our collective healing by untold eons. We have all had the experience, either ourselves or witnessing it in another, of being very, very certain that something fearful is true, only to find, when we open our eyes, there is no danger. The traumatized soldier is sure that every bang is a bomb. Even if he can tell himself it is just fireworks, his subconscious mind reacts as if there were an immediate threat. We are all like that, sure that being human is dangerous and not trusting that our consciousness is perfectly safe at home in God. We are like Dorothy wandering in Oz and realizing that we have just been dreaming and we have been home surrounded by love all the time. Opening our eyes is what we are doing here on earth. We are letting go of every fearful thought and seeing there is no danger. But wait, you say, of course there are dangers in earthly life. Yes, indeed. And those are the very experiences we require to see our fearful beliefs so we can let them go. Like the reading today said, letting go and letting God. The great beings, the enlightened ones, are no longer on the earth in bodies because they have no more need of experience, because they have released every fearful belief. But they are still with us. As Yeshua told me, all time is now and every place is here. So there is nowhere else we can be but with you here and now. We still in bodies are no different from the souls who live in the state of enlightenment. We too will release every fearful belief and live in a state of full awareness of unity with all. So now I get to the title of my talk, The Purpose of Suffering. I did a quick Google search on the purpose of suffering in Christianity, and some messages were pretty good, I have to say. Here's one. Suffering causes our focus to turn inward, to face those parts of ourselves we might otherwise ignore. I agree with that. Or here's a pretty good one, a little tricky. Suffering is a call for us to turn from treasuring anything on earth above God. Though I'm not quite sure how that works, like accepting that life is so painful, we just have to love God. Another teacher agrees with that interpretation and says suffering may lead us to put our trust in the Lord and to keep his commandments, because you can't basically trust anything of the earth, which is actually true. But some messages were not so helpful. For example, God permits suffering in the world to warn the world of the impending judgment. He uses it to call people to repentance. Okay. This one I thought was kind of interesting, a message from a Mormon elder named Orson Whitney. It's not too bad. No pain that we suffer, no trial that we experience is wasted. It ministers to our education, to the development of such qualities as patience, faith, fortitude, and humility. All that we suffer builds up our characters, purifies our hearts, expands our souls, and makes us more tender and charitable, more worthy to be called the children of God. And it is through sorrow and suffering, toil and tribulation that we gain the education which will make us more like our Father and Mother in heaven. But we are already worthy to be called the children of God because that is who we are. And we are already like our Father, Mother in heaven who created us in her or his image. So yes, no trial is wasted as long as we use it as a focusing lens to see what fearful beliefs still remain, keeping us believing that we are separated from God. I was seeing a girl in therapy many years ago who had 3 enormous life challenges: a medical impairment, a few years of sexual trauma at a young age, and a very emotionally impaired mother. Around age 12, she said to me something like, I think I took on a lot in this life so I could work through a lot of problems. Well, I was amazed and I simply agreed with her. I said, yes, I do see that that is what you are doing. When I see people with a huge burden of challenges, what I feel is admiration for their willingness to take on so much. It shows me a soul who is motivated to make progress and drop what no longer serves them. Since we carry our beliefs and emotional patterns forward from one life to the next, we must, you might say, set ourselves up with childhood problems that reenact those patterns so we can then have the chance to resolve them. There's also very clear evidence that trauma is inherited from our ancestors and not just through absorbing the emotional patterns of our parents and grandparents. Here's a little scientific experiment I learned about. If you pair an unusual but neutral smell like lemon with an aversive stimulus in male and female mice, and then you fertilize their eggs in vitro, and then give those baby mice to other parents to raise, their offspring, who have thus have never had any contact with their biological parents, react to the same smell of lemon with fear. In humans, many people have reported sensory memories related to ancestral trauma that they themselves did not experience. So we are learning that trauma affects our DNA. This is actually good news. When you work on healing your own fears, you are actually healing your ancestors' fears. There are shamanistic ceremonies in which the ancestors are called in while a healing, which is always psychological, is enacted with the patient. I want to say that while I know that all healing is at the level of consciousness, when difficulties emerge in the body, they come from such a very deep level of consciousness that it's not easily accessible. So while we are working on facing our fears that the body challenges dig up, meanwhile, it's also helpful to get medical assistance. But ultimately, the fearful beliefs must be healed, including the fundamental fear of dying and the attachment to survival. I have learned that many of the miraculous healings that Yeshua performed did not last, that people reverted back to their original problems, not because of his lack of skill, but because the, quote, patient, so to speak, was still attached to their fearful beliefs. In the 5th chapter of the Gospel of John, we read about a story in which Yeshua told a crippled man that he had healed at the pool of Bethesda, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "Look, you have been made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come to you." What does this mean? It means that the man's beliefs must change, or he will continue to manifest the suffering produced by those beliefs. It does not mean that God is out to get him. It means that our beliefs produce our experience, just as we recite every week in this church. I would like to end my talk by returning to the beginning and remembering that our experience of believing we are separated from God has been going on for 13.7 billion years. We have come a very long way on our journey home. Now we can see the gates of heaven, you might say. We understand how we got ourselves into our painful experiences, and we understand what is required to let go of our fears and return home. Only now, filled with the awareness of who we truly are, the beloved child of God, made in the image of God, with all of the creative powers of God, and made only of love. So rather than despair of all the suffering in the collective consciousness of humanity, it is time to delight that the majority of us know that love is the answer to every apparent problem. We are much closer to home than we have ever been. Let us be motivated to release our fears, knowing the reward is said. The reward is opening our eyes and knowing we have been one with God all along. I'm referring back to the meditation that I shared at the beginning about spiritual friendships, because of course that's what a church is. Spiritual friendships have lasted for eons. The early Christian church emphasized mutual support and friendship as the way love is expressed in the world. Messages that I have received about this church also emphasize friendship and support. And then the joy songs this morning about letting your light shine, that was, of course, perfect from the meditation that was right before. And then sing a song of liberation for the ones who are not free, reveal the way to greater love. So it's all tied together, and we know who we are, and be grateful for all of our challenges so we can release our fears and return to full awareness of who we are and whose we are. And so it is, and amen.